Did you want my man? Bree said, Salima, I'm gay. Salima said, well, why you ain't tell me that a long time ago? You interested in being a unicorn or no? This is Bedtime Stories, Grownup Edition, Genesis, Part 19. When we left off, we had tried to tell True, don't do it, Miss Silly. It ain't worth it. But she ain't listen. And when Star, codenamed Eve, got back to the house that she was sharing with Eden, she said, I'm gonna let him get it when he want it each time. Made a way faster than Amazon Prime. Yeah. Amazon Prime. Then she showed Eden everything she copped on her shopping spree in Jersey. But before she did all of that, she called to check in with Salima. The phone rang several times before it was answered, and when it was answered, it wasn't Salima on the other end of the phone. The night before, Salima had made the 45-minute drive in 28 minutes. She was driving like a bat out of hell, because she was one way behind her man. The call she'd received from Lewis, the Haitian contact, provided her with some vital information. Her husband, Wise, had been lured into a trap. It was well known in the families that Taryn Cato had been colluding with the International Trafficking Organization. To that point, the families had no idea what exactly Taryn Cato was getting out of it. But after that phone call, Salima knew. The traffickers had agreed to have the mercenaries set a trap for Wise. They'd snatch Wise and force Salima to negotiate with them for his release. During those negotiations, Salima would be captured or killed without any regard for her unborn child. So Salima was determined to interrupt that plan. She was not going to wait at home and let them snatch her husband and then wait for a phone call. If she was who they wanted, she was who they was going to get. When Salima walked out of her front door, though, she realized she would not be heading to save Wise alone. Before he left, he told his security to stay right there outside his house. And if his wife left, they needed to follow. So they did just that. The only problem was Salima was able to cut the drive time in darn near half because she was driving a Bugatti Chiron Supersport 300 Plus, the fastest street legal vehicle on U.S. streets. Salima wasn't worried about being pulled over by the police because she could outrace them. Wise was none too happy when his pregnant wife purchased the vehicle. But Salima thought to herself, he gonna be glad I have it when I get there and save the damn day. So Salima proceeded to drive like she was Chantia Latrice Norfleet, the first African-American female NASCAR driver, and quickly left security in her wake. When she pulled up, she spotted Bree's car and Wise's, and neither of them were anywhere to be found. She did the best she could to park the Bugatti inconspicuously. Then she checked the high-tech tracker that was on Wise's phone and picked him up in the woods behind an abandoned house. Shortly before she could get out of the vehicle to investigate, two SUVs with their lights off pulled up on the street, stopped right in front of the abandoned house, and a boatload of goons jumped out and ran behind the house. Using her binoculars, she was able to tell that only one of the SUVs had remained occupied. There was one getaway driver. She deduced that their plan was to snatch Wise, put him in that SUV, and immediately speed off. So she radioed to security, who couldn't be too far behind, established a plan of action, and waited. When they confirmed that their vehicles were positioned in the place that she told them, and that they exited the vehicles and were on foot and headed her way, she pulled out of the spot where she parked the Bugatti and drove right up to the occupied SUV, cracked her window, smiled and said, "Excuse me, I need help. I think I got turned around." And when the driver rolled his window down, she blew his brains out, drove off, and parked. She had not silenced her firearm, so his comrades had to hit a double tap, and they had to come running. When they did, the soldiers that she had strategically placed popped up and out of their locations and immediately took out several of the men in the lead. With their numbers quickly dwindling, there was nothing for security to hold the remaining men at gunpoint. And there was Wise, tied up and gagged, being held by two men. And following behind him was Bree, also tied up and gagged. Salima had told the security to take out all of the men. Anyone who was still alive when they secured Wise was to be forced into the SUVs that they'd driven to the spot and executed. Anybody on the ground was to be picked up and put into the SUVs. Then two men from her security team were supposed to drive the SUVs back to the mercenary safe house. After their failed attempts with Maribel and Portia, and with Michael and Tamara, the mercenaries had been forced to call in reinforcements. They'd also relocated their operations, which was smart because obviously anybody that the families had taken alive had been talking. Unfortunately for them, though, The soldiers that the families had placed on their initial safe house had managed to put tracking devices on several of their vehicles. So when the man who was in charge of all of the operations drove from the old safe house to the new safe house, they knew exactly where it was. Trying to put trackers on all of the mercenaries' vehicles was just too risky. Had they have been able to, they could have intercepted the mercenaries before they ever got to the location where Bree and Wise were being tied up and held. So Lewis had a huge payday coming. His call was perfectly timed, and the information that he provided was priceless. So at the point of the ambush, the mercenaries were outnumbered. The family soldiers had them drop their firearms. Several soldiers had them held at gunpoint and were forcing them into the SUVs. 2 soldiers were untying and ungagging Wise and Bree, and Salima was in the Bugatti down the street, watching like a hawk. She'd gotten out of the car and was creeping down the side of the road using the tree line as cover. So she was perfectly positioned when one of the mercenaries pulled a firearm from his waistband, spun around, and pointed it right at Wise. The mercenaries had orders to take Wise dead or alive. Salima was the big fish, but a dead Wise would make their mission complete. Salima knew that, but she hadn't had time to tell anybody else, and that's why she'd abandoned her car and was creeping up on the scene. She'd concluded that if she was one of the mercenaries, she would recognize the plan right away, and while the chances of her remaining alive would be slim, she'd be unwilling to lose her life without even trying to take Wise's. So she was on high alert for the one brave soul who was willing to take that chance. Hiding in the tree line, less than 200 feet away, Salima upped her pistol and took the shot. Her shot hit its mark, but the man didn't go down. Wise jumped out of the way, landing on Bree, and they both hit the ground. A second mercenary pulled the hidden pistol and got a shot off before the soldier who was holding him at gunpoint could react. That soldier took one to the chest, but thankfully he was wearing a vest. And another soldier who was close by took out that second mercenary. At the same time, a third soldier took out the mercenary that Salima had shot. Adrenaline racing, Salima ran the rest of the distance and pissed off took out the 6 remaining mercenaries her damn self. They all dropped where they stood. The lieutenant who was leading the soldiers said, "Now we gotta pick these niggas up off the ground and put them in the SUVs." Salima said, "You should have moved faster. You should have reacted faster. I shouldn't have had to come over here and doubled over, Salima was holding her gut. Wise, who'd gotten up off the ground and made sure that Bree was good, immediately ran over to her. He said, "Big gangster, you good?" Salima said, "No, I just had a contraction." "This is too damn much. Get in the car and let's go home. I told you not to carry your behind over here behind her." Then Salima turned to Bree and said, "You want my man?" Bree said, "Salima, I'm gay." Salima said, "Well, why you ain't tell me that a long time ago? You interested in being a unicorn or no?" Bree just shook her head. And Wise said, "Big gangster." And several of the soldiers chuckled. Salima said, "What the hell y'all niggas laughing at? Get these niggas up off the ground. Get their radios, find out what's being said. Communicate that y'all got them and y'all on the way." Then she turned to Bree and said, "If I find out you lying, it's off with your head. You know that, right?" Wise said, "Big gangster, get in the car and go home." Salima said, "Where you going?" Wise said, "I'm going with them. These niggas came for me and my coworker. They got you out here putting yourself and our baby in danger. I'ma see this through." Salima said, "Wise, if you don't get in your car and she had another contraction. Wise said, "Oh, hell no. How far apart was that?" Salima said, "I don't know. This is why you need to go home with me. You're not going with them. Bree, are you good? Did they hurt you?" When Bree said no, Salima said, "Somebody escort her home. Get in your car, go home, call your boss. Tell him what happened. Wise, let's go." Then Wise told one of the soldiers to drive his car back to the house because he was driving Salima home in her Bugatti. 30 minutes later, Salima had 8 more contractions. And with all of the gear unloaded, Wise and a caravan of soldiers hightailed it to the hospital. At 32 weeks, it was too early for Salima to have her baby. But after trying all night long, Maribel was unable to stop her labor. Salima's blood pressure was through the roof, and it was safest for her and her baby if she delivered as soon as possible. Salima had refused a C-section, so with a magnesium drip, blood pressure medication, and no epidural, she labored all night. And when Star's call to Salima's phone was answered, it was the Queen Mother who picked up. Star gave her the update, and the Queen Mother assumed responsibility for the operation. Now, y'all pardon my appearance, because y'all know that I am in the middle of my DIY home makeover. I might not look clean, but I am. While Salima was laboring, Wise, Mrs. Ali, and the Queen Mother were at her side. At the same hospital, Portia and Justice were patients. Donovan and Maribel had been at the hospital visiting them. When Maribel got the phone call that Salima was heading to the hospital, when the Queen Mother got the call from Star, Donovan and Maribel were in Portia's room. Portia was being discharged from the hospital, without her baby, and it was not going well. Donovan and Maribel had been at the hospital the night before, so late into the night, because they was doing everything they could to talk Portia out of showing out the next morning. After multiple conversations with hospital staff, they weren't budging. Portia could not remain at the hospital. Hospital policy required that new mothers with babies in the NICU, especially those who'd had C-section, be discharged from the hospital, leave the property, and be gone for at least 4 hours prior to returning. Their goal was to take care of both mother and baby. And part of taking care of the mother included ensuring that the mother went home, got rest, had a meal, and decompressed before returning to the hospital to sit at their baby's bedside in the NICU. The parents could reserve a guest room at the hospital out of pocket. And Donovan had told Portia that the expense wasn't an issue. He'd already requested a room, and one would be provided to her 4 hours after she was discharged. But Portia wasn't playing when she told Maribel they was going to need security to get her up out of that hospital. So when discharge time came, Portia started moving the furniture. When the nurse sat the discharge papers on the bedside table, Portia flipped it over on top of the nurse, jumped out of the bed, C-section stitches and all, and commenced to whooping the nurses behind before Donovan could respond. When Donovan got Portia off the nurse called for security and a shot of benzodiazepine because Donovan was Portia's medical power of attorney. The nurse would need Donovan's approval to administer the shot, and Donovan had already been forewarned that sedating Portia was a real possibility. So while he held her, he was begging her not to force that lady to knock her behind out chemically. When security came, Donovan wasn't going. Wasn't nobody but him putting hands on his baby's mother. So if he couldn't get her to calm down, the nurse was going to have to give her the shot. Portia said, Donovan, if you do this, we're going to be enemies forever. Anybody who has ever had to be sedated in order to control their behavior know how horrible that feels. But the situation was even worse for Portia, because she was pumping milk and had refused narcotics and her stronger psych meds. Because when Justice was ready to be fed, she didn't want him to have formula. Donovan said, last week you was in love with me. Then you was my best friend and Maribel's. And now you gonna hate me forever? Yeah, you need to be medicated. As Portia and Donovan tussled, Portia yelled, get off me! And Donovan yelled, you gotta calm down! One of the nurses had called Maribel. She just finished checking Selima, and Selima was 7 centimeters dilated. So she figured she had enough time to come to Portia's room and see if she could assist. When she walked in, Portia yelled from under Donovan, if you let your husband let these people do this to me and you gonna have beef forever. Maribel said, Portia, I don't have time for this. I have a laboring mother down the hall who I need to get back to. This behavior is unacceptable and it's ridiculous. You can come back in 4 hours. Portia asked, would you leave your baby for 4 hours? If this was your baby, would you leave him for 4 hours? Maribel said, yes, I would. And what happened? Last night, he was our baby. She said, if you let them sedate me, he not your baby no more. He only mine. Maribel looked at the nurse. She looked at Donovan, and Donovan nodded his head. Then the nurse put Portia to sleep. Portia hadn't even considered that while she was getting her way, she was not leaving the hospital and going back to the inpatient treatment facility for 4 hours. She was also still want to be separated from her baby. And it would likely be for more than 4 hours. Because instead of being discharged from the hospital, she was being transferred to the psychiatric unit. And for everybody's safety, including Justice's, she wouldn't be returning to the NICU until a psychiatrist had an opportunity to evaluate her. And until he or she determined that she was no longer a danger to herself or others. Because she had beat the brakes off that nurse. Sis was going to be out on workers' comp for at least a couple of weeks. Portia would be lucky if she didn't get discharged from the hospital and banned. As the sedative began to take effect, Donovan said, P, I told you not to do this. You've made an already difficult situation even more difficult. I'm going to do everything I can to help you be able to see justice. And as Portia went out, she said, go to hell. Meanwhile, Miss Burney had received several text messages from the mercenary who had caught her slipping in the blues lounge. Several of those text messages included photos. And the final text message included a time and a place where Miss Burney needed to meet her. Or else several of the people she loved would start receiving text messages and videos. When she shared that information with Angela and LJ immediately went into planning mode. Miss Burney would show up for the meetup, but she'd be wired for sound and video, and security would be strategically placed to ensure her safety. While the assumption was that the mercenary wanted to meet in person so that she could give Burney instructions, they didn't really know what was going to happen. considering what had happened the night before. When Selima, Wise, and Bree left from the barely occupied area where they'd been lured, the soldiers had carried out the rest of Selima's plan. They'd gotten on the goons' radios, communicated that they had Wise and Bree, and then headed to the safe house. When they pulled up, they were not alone. There were already soldiers strategically placed around the safe house area. But right behind the 2 SUVs that they'd commandeered was a gang of soldiers, and they were all ready for war. Operation Big Gangster was in full effect, and they did what they were paid to do. They killed and captured everyone in sight, took over the safe house, and cleared it out. They took everything that wasn't nailed down. Weapons, tech, medical supplies, everything. Of the goons that were found at the safe house, the woman who'd victimized Miss Burney was not among them. She'd been spotted at that first safe house. But when the mercenaries relocated from the first safe house to the second one, she wasn't there. And the soldiers that had been assigned to the first safe house hadn't been able to get a tracker on her vehicle. She moved with a team, and neither she nor her team had been seen since the mercenaries had abandoned the first safe house. So part of the soldiers' goal, when they accompanied Miss Burney to the meetup, would be to arrive early, put eyes on the female mercenary and her crew, put trackers on their vehicles if possible, and follow them to wherever their rendezvous point was, if technology wasn't an option. And it appeared that the female mercenary was not a slouch, because she'd arranged for Miss Burney to meet her at the Salvation Center of Dallas, Pastor Corey's old church, a mega church that would be crowded with people. Her and her crew had to already know that while Miss Burney still had the same phone number, she no longer had the phone that they downloaded information from and added tracking software to. So they couldn't see her location or her cellular device activity. While they may have still been under the assumption that Miss Burney hadn't told anyone about her assault at the Blues Lounge, they weren't taking any chances. As Miss Burney was heading to the meetup, Natalia, her mother Eugenia, and her older sister Courtney were enjoying brunch after Sunday service. Courtney said, "My assignment here is done, so when we wrap up tonight, I'm heading out." Courtney was employed by the Lopez family. What her family knew about her employment was that she was a legitimate employee. She'd gotten her degree in planning and urban development, and she was in a role that required her to travel to the various countries, states, cities, provinces, and the like, where the Lopez organization owned legitimate property. Her job was to assist with the planning and development of both residential and commercial properties, which included new construction, renovations, and relocations. Natalia had never gotten the opportunity during Courtney's visit to Dallas to question her about whether her date on Friday evening was really a covert operative assignment, or whether sincere was that assignment. Normally she wouldn't pry, but her mother's last-minute extended visit to Dallas and her sister's sudden appearance there had Natalia slightly concerned. That concern wasn't really for herself. She was more concerned for her father. Nathaniel Jimenez, a general with the Lopez organization, had remained in Puerto Rico, but he'd sent his wife to Texas to be with his youngest daughter. He had to know that Natalia had been relocated from the townhouse that had been provided to her by Vibrantly You to a more secluded single-family home that was heavily guarded with an extensive security system, a security room, and soldiers in and around the property, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. While she understood that there was a serious threat against the five families, and her boss, Angela, had to take precautions as a legitimate business owner, there was only one reason why that level of security and her mother's extended visit would even be necessary. That meant that her father was involved in something serious, tense, and potentially deadly. And if her sister knew anything about that, Natalia wanted to know it. Before they left brunch, Miss Eugenia said, "I'll be right back. I need to go to the restaurant." And Natalia saw her chance. As soon as her mother left the table, Natalia said, "All right now, sis. I don't ask you about what you do for a living." Courtney said, "Don't start now." Natalia said, "Sis, I need to know if Daddy's okay." Courtney said, "If he wasn't, you'd know it." Natalia said, "Stop playing. I've accepted this story about you being in legitimate business for all these years because I understand the game. I understand that if you are doing what I think you're doing, then secrecy is paramount, and everybody you know has to be kept in the dark, unless absolutely necessary. I get it. But Daddy wouldn't have sent Mommy to Texas with no return flight information on the same day that Angela moved me from the townhouse to this new house if he didn't have concerns about his ability to keep us safe. And if he had those concerns, you wouldn't be jet setting all around the world, legitimate employee or not." Courtney said, "Well, if you've deduced all of that, you don't need to ask me any questions, right?" Natalia said, "Court, I had a date on Friday. The Lopez organization sent in a covert operative who, with a little makeup and a wig and a few inches on her heels, could absolutely pass for my identical twin. I don't even need you to tell me it was you. If it was, just be quiet until Mommy comes back from the bathroom." Courtney said, but if I do that, that's just going to lead to more questions. Natalia said, no, it won't. I promise not to ask you another question. I may not be in the life, but I understand the need to know basis for communicating any information about any operations. I'm not asking you to betray anybody else's confidence or to operate outside the limitations of whatever it is you got going on. I'm not even asking you to confirm or deny whether you were the covert operative who showed up at my date Friday night. Courtney said, good, then we're on the same page. I can't and won't tell you anything. What I will say is the man you went on the date with on Friday, he's not it, sis. He'll probably make a woman more like me very happy in the future. Now, I'm not interested, but you should definitely keep your options open. And before Natalia could respond or even ask another question, their mother returned. Miss Eugenia said, what happened? Why you look like the cat who caught the canary? While looking directly at Courtney. Courtney said, nothing. Natalia's dating a couple of guys, and I was just letting her know what I thought of one of them. Miss Eugenia asked, have you met him? Or you just heard something about him? Because I don't like one of them for her either. Are we talking about the same one? Then Natalia said, all right, that's enough. I got this. Let me handle my dating life, okay? Believe you me, if I'm planning on committing to anybody, I'll introduce you to them. But until then, know that I'm keeping my options open. Rotational dating seems to be working for me. And as of yet, there are no contenders for exclusivity, a relationship, or marriage. And in unison, Courtney and Miss Eugenia said, good. And Natalia looked at the waiter who was approaching and said, check, please.